Welcome. Timestamps are included below. We must pick the witch class to have access to the Infernalist ascendancy. The Infernalist has many good options, but Pyromantic Pact is something we could use with Barrier Invocation. All of our mana is replaced with Infernal Flame, so now when we cast an ability, we don't hear.
I need more mana.
Now we burn instead. So we take damage when we cast our spells, and how much damage is based on the total of our maximum life and energy shield. Pyromantic Pact says we take fire damage, and this is reduced by our fire resistance. Normally we are able to get 75%, but with some other items, like soul cores, which are put into sockets on armor, or ruby jewels with an increased maximum fire resistance stat, each are examples of ways to raise fire resistance up to the cap of 90%. Having 25% more than whatever maximum fire resistance you have will prevent the effects of fire exposure, which is a 10% reduction in resistance, and elemental weakness, which is a further 15% and can be seen randomly on maps. So we cast spells to fill our Infernal Flame and take damage, based on our life and energy shield, which is reduced by resistance. As you can see, life and energy shield add together to make about 5,000, and with 90% resistance, only 500 damage is dealt to us, each time we fill our flame. With lower investment into items, it can be difficult to make the build work, but still possible. At least try to cap resistances, and have high flask recovery. Now we understand how much damage we will take, we must look at the skill we will be using, which is Barrier Invocation. Let's see how much energy we will generate from receiving 500 damage. Gain 1 energy for each 5 energy shield lost, which works with the damage we take from Infernal Flame. To work out how much energy we generate, all we do is simply divide the damage we took by 5. With 500 damage taken, as discussed earlier, we generate 100 energy to fuel charges for Barrier Invocation. After generating energy, it is increased by another stat, called Meta Energy Gain, which can be found on Sapphire jewels, as well as on the skill tree. This means that after calculating our damage taken, by combining our life and energy shield, then applying our resistance, we must do one of two things, both give us the same result. We can either apply our energy gain modifier, and then divide the result by 5, or we can divide by 5 first, and then apply our energy gain after. It doesn't matter which order you do this in, and the reason we divide our damage taken value by 5 is because we gain 1 energy per 5 damage taken. So that is how we generate energy, when we take damage from Infernal Flame. Now we must find how much energy we need to generate. Barrier Invocation tells us that the energy requirement is related to cast time. For every 0.1 seconds of cast time, we will need to generate an additional 10 energy. In other words, we can multiply the total cast time of all the spells we put into Barrier Invocation by 100 to find out the energy requirement for one cast. This will be the case no matter what your stats are, because this is based on the cast time of the skill. Cast speed will not affect the base cast time of skills, so this has no effect on Barrier Invocation. Maximum energy is important to consider when choosing which skills to use. A cast time of 0.8 seconds and 0.5 seconds equals 1.3 seconds when added together, and if we multiply this number by 100, we get 130, which is the energy required to cast both spells, with one activation of Barrier Invocation. If we need 130 energy to activate Frostbolt and Cold Snap, but we have 500 maximum energy, then this means we can hold up to 3 charges at once, because 130 goes into 500 3 times, meaning if we could generate 390 energy, we would cast both spells 3 times with one activation. Maximum energy will always be 500, or 900 if you use Capacitor. This means, when you are deciding which spells to use, you must add up the cast time of them all. If we take these 3 skills as an example, Fireball, Ball Lightning, and Frostbolt, we can see their cast times all add up to 3 seconds. To recap on how we work out the energy required, a combined cast time of 3 seconds would equal an energy requirement of 300. But, because our maximum energy is only 500, we can only store 1 charge. If we were using Capacitor to increase our energy to 900, then in this example we would be able to store 3 charges. Taking damage can generate energy for us to use with Barrier Invocation. We must gain the required energy needed for the skills we have chosen. But there is one more piece to the puzzle in balancing all of these stats to achieve a loop of continual casting. This would be the mana costs of skills, which is now converted to Infernal Flame. After each cast of Barrier Invocation, we must ensure we can cast it again by looking at the charges on the skill icon. We can see on the Pyromantic Pact Ascendancy, we lose 10% Infernal Flame per second if we don't gain any for 2 seconds. Currently, this is not counting the flame gained from triggered spells, and as such, we are constantly losing Infernal Flame. Because of the continual loss of flame when working out mana costs, we must compensate for this drainage and have slightly higher mana costs than our maximum Infernal Flame, so we overfill it. Infernal Flame will overflow, meaning any flame we generate, which we don't need to fill up the globe, will carry over once it empties. Without any bonuses active, our mana cost is too low. With a cost of 357 flame, we must cast 3 spells to trigger our Infernal Flame, to damage us and generate energy, so we can cast spells, which will trigger Infernal Flame again, and repeat. In this setup, because we need to cast 3 times to fill our flame, we see the fire inside the globe move 3 times, once for each cast of the skill. This is a good loop. We are constantly casting and are not burning to death. Now we will look at a bad loop. Our cost has increased to 404, which now means we only need to cast 2 spells to activate Infernal Flame, so we will take damage much faster than before. The amount of maximum Infernal Flame that you should aim to have will typically be as little as possible, but some versions of the build will find they cast too many spells, and to stay alive, they must increase maximum mana. So by increasing our maximum mana, and also our Infernal Flame, we can counteract the high mana cost by increasing the amount of casts needed to fill our flame. We can now see that it takes 3 casts to fill our flame, compared to before, where it took 2, meaning we took 50% more damage, which we reduced by increasing our mana, due to having high mana costs. The way we heal from all of this burning is with flasks, using the Eternal Youth Keystone, or Chevron's Belt, to restore our energy shield instead. There are also some special modifiers which exist, that also affect the way this build works. Energy required is equal to cast time, multiplied by 100, but with skills such as Comet and Lightning Conduit, they have another modifier, which adds 1 second to the total base cast time. Barrier Invocation also has a modifier, which doubles the effectiveness of this penalty, making it a 3-second cast time and requiring 300 energy. Another interaction with Barrier Invocation is the order in which skills are cast, which is very easy to demonstrate. We can see Ball Lightning in the leftmost socket, with 2 Frostbolts proceeding in the second and third slots, respectively. So we do see Ball Lightning appear first, followed by 2 Frostbolts in the same order of the sockets. It will be hard to see Ball Lightning in the middle, because it moves faster, but we will see a space between Frostbolts this time. They still cast in the same order as they are put into Barrier Invocation. Let's try Ball Lightning last, and 2 Frostbolts first. We can clearly see the order of projectiles when we slow down the video. As we can see, spells will always cast, following this pattern of left to right. The order of gems does matter, because the spells are cast consecutively when using skills with different mana costs, gem levels, or cast times. it can cause spells to appear staggered and prevent casting. Also, when using gems like Comet or Lightning Conduit, it is impossible to spam it without Capacitor. When using Capacitor, these skills work, but will require a lot of energy to cast, and will be much harder to collect gear for, so picking a skill with low cast time is good for starters. Now, let's try without Capacitor and see what happens. We can see the energy percentage filling up to 40%, and then going to 100%, which is because 300 energy is 60% of 500 energy, so the remaining 40% would be the 200 energy left over out of 500 maximum energy after casting a Comet. Because Comet's base cast time is being altered by 1 second, it is not considered by Capacitor to have been reduced to 0 seconds, like every other skill without this modifier. With skills that have this penalty, the energy is being generated first, before it is spent. Now we have explored Pyromantic Pact, and how we will use it, let's quickly look over Demon Form, and some helpful tricks. This is a shape-shifting skill, that gives us cast speed, which we do not benefit from with Barrier Invocation. We also get +6 to levels of spells, for a level 20 Demon Form, which is unlocked at character level 90. We also generate Demon Flame each second. For every one we have, we get 18% spell damage, but also take 0.5% of our health for each stack. There are ways to deal with this, even with hundreds of stacks. The lowest this damage can deal is 1 point of health, which means the lowest amount of health we can have to ensure we take the least amount of damage, of 1, is to have 200 life, because 0.5% of 200 is 1, so reducing life further will have no effect. Depending on your recovery, and your total life amount, you can easily get at least 800 stacks. Having so many stacks also means we get a big increase to spell damage, at over 800 stacks, that is a bonus of 14,400%, which means we have no difficulty defeating any boss in the game, regardless of our skill options. There's also the issue of losing 0.5% of our health per stack, and at over 800 stacks, that is a whopping 400% of our maximum health, taken as damage each second. So how do we live through damage equal to 4 times our total life a second? The answer is damage taken recouped as life. This does work with Infernal Flame, as well as skill nodes on the tree like Loose Flesh, or on Amulets and Jewels. This stat is the only thing you need to get high Demon Flame stacks. Depending on your Barrier Invocation setup, you may need more or less damage recoup, depending how much damage you do to yourself. Because of this, it is beneficial for us to keep maximum Infernal Flame low, so that it fills up as fast as possible with any spell, and damages us more, granting us increased healing to sustain more Demon Flame stacks. Here we will see the difference in life regeneration required, to keep up with a certain amount of stacks. The way to work out how much damage you will take from Demon Flame stacks, is to half the amount of stacks you have, and that is the percentage of life you take as damage each second. The lower your actual life, the less damage you will take, and the longer you will last, collecting Demon Flame stacks and growing stronger. I will lastly share some tips for Demon Form, helping you get going at the start of a map. Flask recovery in a shield, from Vision Runes, will apply to you before you shapeshift. You could drink all your flasks, just before transforming, to get a healing boost for the first 30 seconds. You can see after transforming, the recovery per second has not changed. This will eventually run out, depending on your flask duration stat, and the flasks you drink now will stack and be used after the first load run out. We can also get up to 40% more spell damage from Soul Offering for the first 10 seconds of Demon Form. This helps at the start, or when forced to shapeshift during a Citadel boss fight. We must find the lowest level Rattling Scepter we can, even from the vendor in Act 1, is fine. This is because the strength requirement increases with level, and we have very little strength. Any stats it may have will be negated when we shapeshift, so literally any one of them will be good. Another tip to help, checkpoints restore all flask charges, and some are located opposite the entrance. You should first use all of your charges before walking past the checkpoint to completely refill your flask and drink them all again, because they will stack. I also suggest to keep your barrier invocation enabled at all times. Even though the shapeshift option is selected, we must still select which weapon slot we are using. Removing barrier invocation, or changing the gems inside of it, will reset this option, and you must enable them again. Another spell which is very powerful is Eye of Winter. The plus 10% to base critical chance is good enough, but we can also inflict cold exposure and Withering Touch. Withering Touch is particularly powerful, because if we are using 2 Ming's Heart Rings to help lower our life for demon form, we will have up to 80% damage as extra chaos, and then Wither increases this by 50%, so it is a very powerful support to use. Ghostwrite is also very helpful for lowering our life, which helps sustain demon flame stacks, and gives us a large amount of energy shield. The maximum life converted to energy shield modifier can be increased up to 61%, so get one as high as your budget allows. Now we must cover flask recovery, how we use it to restore energy shield, and the life flask itself. At least 20% quality, as higher roll on increased life recovered, and reduced charges. We get 50% reduced flask charges, with 32% from the flask, and 18% from the belt. This is the key mechanism for flask sustain. There are 4 ways we currently gain flask charges per second. The first is through the Alchemist's Boon Spirit Gem. There are 2 skill points we take in the tree, Hail Traveler, and Refills. Both are important to keep your flask up forever, and the hardest to find is a fine belt, and at 0.17 charges, it's our second highest source, so it must be used. The belt can also have increased flask life recovery, and reduced flask charges used, as well as increased charges gained. There are other ways to mix and match these stats. See what's available on the market at the time. Our main keystone passive in the tree is Eternal Youth, which lets us heal energy shield instead of life, with our flask, and then this is combined with the Oasis keystone, which disables our charms, but gives us 30% more recovery, which is greatly needed. Lastly, Potent Concoctions is also one of our biggest increases, alongside Lasting Concoctions, which helps us keep the flask active permanently. There are multiple choices for an anointment, but they are all obtainable eventually. Our best options are Hard to Kill and Heavy Drinker, and Soul Bloom. All 3 are amazing options and anyone is very helpful. Until these passives are unlocked, many emerald jewels must be used. Eventually, Soul Bloom is obtained with skill points, and then Heavy Drinker and Hard to Kill may either be an anointment or a megalomaniac passive. It does not matter which way around this is. For jewels, rubies are best with maximum fire resistance, emeralds are used for flask duration, and extra flask life recovery. Finally, sapphires are the most versatile, with energy shield and meta energy being the most important stats. We also make use of 3 unique jewels. Against the Darkness gives us maximum fire resistance, a megalomaniac can give us Hard to Kill or Heavy Drinker, and the From Nothing jewel saves us 7 skill points. We have shown which armor and rings to use, as well as the belt, so let us now go through the rest of the gear, which is used to cap as many resistances as possible, with extra energy shield and intelligence. However, if choosing to play with Unearth, there is the possibility you choose to wear a helmet with a bonus to minion levels, which will greatly increase damage at the cost of resistance. There is one last stat requirement which must be met on gear, which is a +5 to spirit roll on the amulet, either as a prefix or as an implicit on a solar amulet. If you are on a budget and are struggling to get high gem levels to increase mana costs, there are a few items which can help. Crown of Victors is good, even at high levels. There is also up to +100 spirit you can get through the campaign, so if you don't have 100 spirit, you have likely missed the witch, Ignagduck, in Act 3 normal, and Act 3 cruel, so go back and kill her if you haven't already. While we are speaking about campaign rewards, I must remind us that this is early access, and we only have access to 3 acts, so the locations of some of these rewards will definitely change, and some of the rewards themselves may be different altogether, but for now, these are the options to take if leveling this build. In Act 1, there is an optional boss, in Ogham's Manor, called Candlemas. He gives us plus 20 to our life in our first playthrough, and 8% increased life in Cruel. We want to avoid this as much as possible, as it means we will have less demon flame stacks and less damage. In Act 2, there is an option to find 2 relics and restore them at a shrine, but we only get a benefit from it in Cruel difficulty, as normal grants us more charm charges, or mana regeneration from flasks, so we can't use them. Instead, take some extra increased flask life recovery. They are not guaranteed drops, and many enemies must be fought to randomly obtain them and finish the quest. And lastly, for now, we have the Venom Crypt quest. We want to pick increased elemental threshold to help us defend against shocks and freezes, which is from normal. From Cruel, we pick up an extra plus 5 to all stats. Plus 5 to all attributes enables us to wear extra red support gems, and with just plus 42 intelligence on gear, and this draft, we meet gem stat requirements. This is the no spreadsheet formula in practice. Comet has a cast time of 3, which means we need 300 energy, and we currently have an energy bonus of 201%. This is because our total life and energy shield is slightly below 5,000, so we need slightly higher energy. This is based on the stats just shown, but can be achieved with many different combinations. This will change when I level up, and I will gain life, meaning I need less energy, and can safely remove 1%. We are safely casting, and can do this forever with our flask recharging. Some spell combinations can still be deadly. If our costs become too high, we must increase our maximum mana, but this is easy to swap with on gear. There is one last piece to the build, which can be used with any skill that you place into Barrier Invocation. This is cast by us, and to relieve the penalty we get to movement speed, we use the Arcane Tempo and Mobility support gems, as well as, preferably, a low cast time skill, so that it slows us less. I am currently using Spark, because it has great synergy with Flame Wall, and many other projectile skills that I use as well. So you can cast any skill, while holding Barrier Invocation. Try experimenting with spells like Flame Wall, which can support other skills. Another way this build is fragile is its susceptibility to shock, and taking 20% increased damage. You just need higher flask recovery than normal, at least 20% more. A way to test if you are shockproof, with 90% fire resistance, is to take off 2%. With jewels, you should be able to do this indefinitely. To show you are shockproof, if your energy shield is bouncing up and down when you test this, then you need more recovery. If you do not have 90% fire resistance, carefully clear a map with shocked ground and test there. You do not need to be shockproof and play on the footstep of death's door, but you may randomly die to lightning damage, even with higher ailment threshold. To start the loop of infinite casting, make sure Barrier Invocation is enabled before playing. Then, we must charge our Barrier Invocation to the most charges it can hold, depending on our cast times. We do this by casting spells. One with a high mana cost is better, such as a curse. Once we cast our spell, we must start drinking our flasks as fast as possible, before turning into our demon form. Soul Offering can be used any time, but I prefer to use it only in Citadel boss fights. Once we transform, we must start casting spells to start our life recuperation, and negate demon forms stacking damage to us. This is my current skill tree, at level 94, and I am utilizing 3 unique jewels for their powerful effects. Soul Bloom is a particularly strong node, as discussed before. Against the darkness only needs to have maximum fire resistance to notable passive for it to be useful to us. We have a Prism of Belief, to raise the level of our skill gems, and mana costs. Whispers of Doom is for Hexblast, but the double curses also works on bosses, and due to them being slow at the start, it is not a problem. From Nothing must allow us to allocate passives near Eternal Youth, where we gain some very powerful bonuses. Eternal Youth itself, like we mentioned earlier, is the way we choose to recover the damage dealt to us by Infernal Flame. The Ruby Jewels have maximum fire resistance. Other good stats could be generic damage, like fire damage. Also, fire penetration is very strong, as well as increased skill effect duration, which can also be found on Sapphires, and is a helpful stat for almost every skill. Also on Sapphires, we choose to get meta energy, but we do not have any energy shield stats on our jewels, because we are following specific guidelines, but you may need to have it on your jewels. Area of effect, critical damage and chance bonuses, as well as cold penetration, are all very nice to have. And now, what we've all been waiting for. Fireball, Frostbolt, and Ball Lightning add up to a cast time of 3, so we need 300 energy. We can increase energy shield to do this, instead of meta energy, to get the same result. The only difference is that we take more damage when raising energy, with energy shield, and so for some skills this will work fine, but for others like Comet, it will kill us. We must keep as low energy shield as possible while still gaining enough energy to loop. We get higher energy shield through our gems, having a full set with just meta energy, and another set with energy shield and meta energy, helps find the balance for your personal stats, by letting you mix and match different ones to find the right energy value. I've also covered a lot of skills in the early access version, so whichever skill you are interested in, there will be a version using the skill. Although there are so many skills to use, and ways to combine them, I just hope to inspire you to be creative and try your favorite skill. Thanks for watching, and take care.